Yes, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another brand new Rugby Muscle podcast. I'm your host, as always, TJ, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jacob Reed of Renaissance Periodization. I don't think I'm going to be doing one of these intros for every single one of these podcasts this year, but I did think that I'd want to introduce this one, not to introduce Jacob, because he is, I think, the most listened to podcast guest that we've ever had on the Rugby Muscle podcast, but just to let you know that I've done as best I can with the sound that we've been dealing with at the minute. I 100% am working on a solution as far as a microphone and recording and sound quality goes. But in terms of information, like it's just too good not to share. So Jacob Reed is an absolute expert when it comes to all things sort of sport performance, but actually getting people on board, like regular folk, being able to be better. And we get into a little bit of mental toughness versus sports preparation and how we can sort of blend the two and what that sort of means for you as an athlete and as a rugby player. Uh, and we also go into his own experiences and his own stories with his training, but also with athletes and teams that he's been working with. So I do think this is a 100% invaluable insight. And if you think so as well, as usual, give us a 5-star review either on Apple Podcast or on Spotify. You can give a 5-star review on Spotify now, and it will mean the world to me. If you're listening on YouTube, of course, give it a thumbs up. Let me know any feedback on the podcast you would love, anything that you would like to listen to in future podcasts, or what you thought of this podcast in the comments below, because also, of course, that helps us out massively. But for now, like I said, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep doing these introductions because I just think like you want to get into the listening. So enough of me talking. Let's get you into the listening of this podcast with Dr. Jacob Reed. So I'm not going to give you a big intro because, again, you are the most listened to guest we've had on the podcast. So if they don't know who you already are, then they should go back and add to that already vastly high number. But what are you doing at the minute?
So right now I'm still teaching at the University of Northern Iowa, and I just received word that all things are go for me to have tenure there. So I have
Nice.
one more hurdle, so that'll be nice. And then I'm still coaching RP clients all the time, training and diet and all that kind of stuff.
I was going to ask if you have well, actually, I looked it up if you have a specific niche that you work with the RP guys, but it doesn't seem like it might be something specific then.
Well, I thought you were gonna go a different way. I don't have a specific clientele that I work with. I like honestly everybody. What I prefer to work with are the people kind of in my scenario. Like I'm a father of 3. I have a almost 5, almost 3, and a 9-month-old, and essentially 2 jobs. So
Mhm.
I have my own goals, physique related and just, training related goals. And so it's nice to have that, like, that's my current level of empathy that I can really express to parents and just people like, our age that are just kind of living in life and trying to get through their day to day because everybody's got their stressors. So that's the people that I generally I like to work with everyone. That's my main group.
It's funny because those are the people that you can relate to as well, right? Like directly, and they know you can because you're living it. It's not like this 20-year-old telling people, "Hey, yeah, it doesn't matter about your kids. You just don't care enough." You're like, no, you don't relate. So
Exactly.
yeah, that works out pretty well. So yeah, as spoke to you already and told you that we last time we spoke a lot about mental toughness, why it's so weirdly popular in rugby and in sport in general, and why that might make people fall short in their results. But to get sort of an opening, what are your overall thoughts? If someone asked you, that I want to be more mentally tough, how do I go about doing that? And they gave you no context, how would you react?
Uh, if they asked me that, I would ask them why first. So what evidence do they have to suggest that they need to be more mentally tough? And then from there, that might lead to well, I'm getting gassed in the last 5, 10 minutes of a match,
Mhm.
or I can't can't seem to really, I can't go into a tackle with like the intensity that I'm looking for, or, throwing on a line out and it's too nerve wracking, or kicking, those high pressure situations. And so then that's going to direct us to where we actually, the root of the problem, if it's a fitness issue, if it's a skill issue, if it's a tactical consideration, anything along those lines can give us something that is actually, we know can be modifiable. And then from there, it turns into, okay, so you have this thing that you believe you're lacking in. So now let's give you the skills to be able to cope with it. If it's a fitness thing, I'm just not tired enough. Okay, well, the reality is that's not mental toughness. That's just fitness. And so let's enhance your fitness. Where are you lacking? What kind of standardized rugby tests can we do to see, is it an aerobic fitness? Is it anaerobic? Is it the combination of repeated sprint ability and that kind of stuff? So that'll direct us to where we want to be. But when working with somebody from a mental toughness standpoint, it's helping them to understand that there is more than just mental toughness that results in whatever they think they're lacking in. It's not just this idea that I need to go and just beat myself apart physically in order to do well, in order to enhance this. There are coping mechanisms that you can introduce. There's a deeper understanding of the psychology of the individual that becomes really important, that is going to have the actual impact rather than just hard physical training through and through. And we need hard physical training. Like, I'm not saying no to that, but it's just, let's be deliberate about how we incorporate that kind of thing.
Okay. And then from there, like that leads me to sort of two main areas of or trains of thought. The first one is sort of, if we're talking about being tough, like it's almost which comes first, right? Because we always see someone who's performing really well, and we think, oh, they're really tough, but we're only saying that because they're performing really well. Maybe that's because they've already got the skills or the fitness or the whatever it is in place to complete whatever given task that is. There's no real indication that that person's tough. There's just the indication that that person is better, right? And I think weirdly enough, that might even make that person less tough because they're less used to adversity if they're used to more. Is that something that you found as well? It's actually ends up being more of the opposite. Like someone that's less skilled but and subsequently less successful is actually, like if we're looking at it quantitatively, is less tough.
That could absolutely be the case. I think the best scenario is if anybody's ever seen the movie Waterboy,
Mm.
and they're setting up to do the onside kick at the end of the game. And the kicker's just scanning the crowd or the front line. He's like, where's my guy? It's not what he says, but that's what he's looking at. And he looks for the person that is just literally, their eyes are telling them, don't kick it to me, don't kick it to me, don't kick it to me. I'm gonna botch this thing. And that comes with, you have that individual right there that it's just, they're not expressing mental toughness. But then you could also have the other side of it where it's this individual that, has had a lot of experience and they've done many different things. They probably do have what we would call more mental toughness because they have a confidence in their skills. They actually have, an arrogance about it, almost to the point that they believe they're better than what they are. And what's interesting is the literature will suggest that that person might actually like go above and beyond their true capacity as long as they believe in their abilities, regardless of if they have it or not. And so
Okay.
it really does come into this. We have to have people that have experienced a lot of different things. When I was working with volleyball before, one of the things that I loved having and loved seeing was struggle in the preseason. In American volleyball, it's the first I don't know, month or so ish, 3 weeks to a month is all preseason. You're going and playing multiple games a day against really high caliber talents. You haven't figured out your rotation yet. Your top 6. And you want struggle there because you want people to be in uncomfortable scenarios. You want to teach them this is what you need to do in order to be like, when this happens, this is how you need to adapt to it. And then as the team and the goes through that group struggle, There turns into a collective understanding of what needs to be done, who is capable of doing what. You can see when your teammates struggle, and you can then get into actually being that really teammate, where we want people to support each other and understand what is, what each other needs. And you might have that person that's, never experienced any hardship. And then as soon as they do, if they crumble, eh, that's complete and total lack of mental toughness.
And is that something that can be trained, like through more exposures to that struggle?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the beauty of things like small-sided games,
Hmm.
especially in training for rugby, and all sports that it makes sense to incorporate them, is that you can design the game to be not only enhancing fitness, but to get them, to get them tired. If you know these people have never, like this particular athlete, they've never struggled, and as a coach, you understand what they also haven't experienced. You can then put them in that scenario, and whether if it's a big game scenario, those are a little tougher to mimic, but you can design things that are very, very game-like in terms of the speed, the fitness requirements, the fatigue they're experiencing, the tactics, the techniques. And then if you do that and you get them to experience it outside of competition, now you've at least it's not a new thing for them as they get onto the field. And all of those pieces are really important. You have to have game-like speeds. You have to have game-like fatigue and tactics and techniques. Because otherwise, as soon as they step on the pitch, it doesn't matter. Now
Hmm.
everything's moving much faster than what I'm used to, or I'm really used to this very specific constrained scenario, and I don't know how to adapt beyond it. It's kind of like long-term athlete development.
Yeah.
You don't want the one sport athlete. You want the kid that's gone up and they're playing jumping out of trees, that have done all of these kinds of things. They've dabbled in wrestling, basketball, and baseball, and soccer, and rugby, and all of these pieces, gymnastics, so that they've developed the motor pathways, the confidence, the struggle in doing everything, because 'cause they're not gonna be that great, and that puts them in a better place to succeed later on as well.
100%. I don't want to sort of argue against a straw man, but there seems to be a case here for making sure that with all these different sports for kids, like there is a win and a loss. I think it's getting strange to the point there's a lot of no keeping scores and no not letting anyone feel bad. And I'm like, why are we getting so upset that a 5-year-old is up like is sad? Like who get like they're gonna be fine as adults. Like no even if if anything they're gonna be worse if they're not if they're sheltered from any sadness as a kid because that's not gonna prepare them for the real world, right?
Exactly. Like, with our kids, we try to give them many as broad of a life experience as we can.
I thought you were gonna say you
Because
give them no chance in every sport. You just smash them every time.
well, the funny thing is that you look at that and I want them to have broad experiences, but I also don't want them to be put in a scenario with somebody that is utterly incompetent.
Mhm.
And, I mean, we had that even last summer. Signed up our kid up for T-ball. The coach comes out, it's this 14-year-old girl that is they have a volleyball, and now they're gonna start playing kickball. And then what she was actually doing, she decided to, "Oh, okay, we'll just have 15 4-year-olds stand in a line and throw a ball at a tee and then go chase it and go stand back in line." So I understand the struggle of that, but it's also, there's a point at which, they're kids. It does need to be fun,
Mhm.
and they should be struggling doing the things that are, meaningful to the sport. It shouldn't be boring. And so for me anyway, it's a difficult piece to struggle with, to know and at least put them with a coach that is some degree of competence, that can,
Mhm.
isn't going to burn them into the ground and just do things that honestly don't make sense from any standpoint.
This is a tangent I want to entertain because I remember when I was working with a sports performance facility when I was in the US. I was in Colorado, and every Sunday I train a couple people in the morning, and then for my second session there'd be these two kids, and they were I don't know, but their baseball bags that they were carrying were as big as them. And they came in and they did an hour and a half of, it must have just been pitching. It couldn't have been hitting, right? So they were just doing an hour and a half of just pitching with this coach, just these two kids, and they were tiny. And I was like, they're doing this to prepare them for something that is maybe they're 6, right? So they're preparing themselves for college when they're 18. That's double the life, their entire life that they've already experienced away. And they're doing just repetition after repetition. I'm like this, and also the parents, like how much they're spending on this coach. I'm like, put that towards a college fund. Like that's how you get your kid a scholarship is you pay for it with that money. It drives me nuts.
Same. I actually devote in one of my classes time to talking about early specialization and all of the literature that we have out there that it supports exactly what you're talking about. It's like, yeah,
Yeah, get them doing lots of different things, solving lots of problems. It's not like they're, the age, the development that occurs between the age of, anything before 12, like, or anything before like anywhere, close to the end of puberty doesn't really make a difference until, it doesn't compare to what they go, the exposure they go to in their mid to late teens, right? And that's when you really want to start to specialize and
yeah.
have them
It just
actually,
depends on the sport.
yeah, for
You can
sure.
have like gymnastics where they're competing in the Olympics at 12, 13 years old. But yeah, otherwise, that 12, 13 is generally when people say to start specialized, but that's also just dependent on what makes sense for the kid.
And so to go back to the mental toughness side of things, and I think sort of piggybacking off of the encouraging kids to fail all the time, and you especially making sure that your kids always lose in every sport that they do. We want to make sure that like this has developed them to be tougher athletes. Is there a way that we can sort of measure or ensure that we're not just losing for the sake of losing, that we're actually building out toughness? Because sometimes, as well as I do, there are coaches that will do, you see a lot in American sports, Coach Carter springs to mind when he makes them run thousands of suicides. Like, is that building any toughness or is that just burning someone into the ground at that point when things are like that hard?
That's just burning people into the ground. I mean, they literally killed people doing that.
Hmm.
There's the offensive lineman from Maryland. They killed the guy because they're asking him to do 110s. And
Yeah.
so there
110s and gases and 300s are old staples. And my buddy Kier, the rugby strength coach, has recently been hitting out of that a lot. And it's funny because you think that these things are limited to your one sport and niche that you're in. Oh, a bit of an American accent creeping in there. In the niche that you're in, but it's not. Like there is stupid stuff in every. It's a lot of it is about being like trying to be as tough as you can. Even in new sports like Rabdo the Clown in CrossFit, like that's not tough.
No, exactly. I actually talk a lot about, and I follow Kier, have similar beliefs and mindsets that he does. And it's one thing I teach to my kids in my classes is, we can make people fit other ways than doing one testing gassers at the end of practice.
Hmm.
Like your practice is going to be terrible leading up to it because they know they're going to do it. It's not going to be fun. There's going to be low quality work. There's going to be, it's just not a good scenario because they're just going to be saving themselves to get into it, regardless of what you want to believe. No, they should be going hard. Okay, sure, it's not happening.
Hmm.
And so for those kids to make sure that we want them to be able to understand what training hard actually is, what
Hmm.
makes sense for their sport. Understand the actual game, be a student of it. Know how far do you have to travel? I was asking offensive linemen, I'll usually have one or two in one of my classes. I'll say, how far do you think you travel in a game? They're like, I don't know, 500 yards? No, try 3 to 5,000 yards of just traveling. This is walking,
Hmm.
jogging, sprinting. You wanna tell me that, your fitness characteristics don't need any, like, aerobic metabolism? Now, I'm not saying don't go and run. What I'm saying is, like, let's find ways to make you train as offensive lineman to actually enhance that system. Like, if you're doing conditioning, why are you doing it?
Hmm.
If it's for you to express your frustrations with practice, that's your problem. That's not if it's to enhance fitness, okay, do it differently. Maybe structure a different time. Maybe actually plan practice so that it is legitimately hard from a game standpoint.
Mhm.
That's why I love small-sided games. Like, they make sense from every possible angle, from every sport that it makes sense to put it in. And so it's, we just wanna make sure that from a mental toughness standpoint, we're letting them struggle, and from whatever aspect it may be, and then we're giving them the skills to cope with it. And those skills aren't literally like, "Oh, just suck it up, Nancy." It's, "Okay, what are you feeling right now?" So, is it how like, it's having that conversation with the athlete and seeing where they're struggling. What part of this are you struggling at? Have you done any visualization? What are you doing to try to adapt to it other than just go harder? That doesn't get you there. There's actually specific standpoint. There's, like, tactics that you can incorporate.
100%. And I think what you said there, everything that you've said has been about solving the problem of the sport that you're trying to do, right? Like, th a lot of people see toughness as, we're doing these runs or we're doing, or they'll do it on some old school weightlifting coaches will put them in the weight room and they'll make them develop toughness in the weight room. But what you're saying is the struggle is the problem solving that occurs in the sport. It's not just is that right? So if I want to be a better rugby player, is there any benefit to me struggling and losing consistently at, say, chess or on a rowing workout or anything like that? Do any of these things actually have a transfer to the toughness that we have to utilize to win a sport?
An argument could probably be made if you have 24 hours a day to devote to your sport. Then, yeah, I bet that somehow that would transfer over, but the reality is nobody has that much time.
Mhm.
We're talking about people that they're working jobs. They're maybe able to get in, if they have a 2-hour practice and then a 1-hour training session in a day, that's a big day.
Mhm.
And so that's what gets we have to be aware of how we're using our time. And what I like to do when I'm talking about this whole developing fitness and mental toughness being a component of fitness is that, look, what we do in the weight room, from the standardized procedures of like bench, squat, deadlift, cleans, that kind of thing, those develop the system. They create the ceiling as high as we can physically get it. And then what we want to do is take that and actually start doing sport specific but controlled things. That's why you start to see sandbags. That's why you start to see wrestling in rugby,
Mhm.
like moving kegs around, that kind of stuff, because I've become strong. Now I'm moving awkward things because that's a lot of what rugby is.
Mhm.
So I'm teaching myself in a controlled environment to actually do that. And the controlled environment is key. Is if you want to teach, like, have skills learned, there has to be repetitive, controlled, like, application of what's going on. And then once they've done that, that's where practice comes into play in competition and becomes more of a real world, real game scenario. And I think a lot of people, either they fall into, we're going to lift weights and then practice, or they fall into, screw lifting weights, that's old school, we're going to be in the middle and just do things that look super sport specific, and then we're going to go practice, where it's this stepwise, or at least not necessarily people believe that, but
That's how it
in
works out.
the tribal way of which media and social media is being presented, you're one or the other, rather than, well, there's a sequential way to incorporate everything. And what is best for the time that we have right now at the time of the year is really what we need to focus on. And we build into it, incorporate mental skills training along the way, and it works. Like, even from a weightlifting standpoint, you want to teach somebody really high quality mental skills, the weight room, normal weight training session, pretty high intensity, silence, no talking,
Mhm.
nothing. Like, you can't even talk to tell your teammate what weight to put on the bar. And you have to find a way to communicate, find a way to get it in yourself. You can't talk in between sets. There's no music. You sit and you think. You're visualizing, you're practicing those pieces in the weight room, which help to transfer into other things, because now you're you've got that skill, at least you started to understand how it works for you. And so they can be, but it's just how can we be creative about doing it without um taking too much time and being add-on coaches as well.
100%. That's so good. I think I want to talk about the fact that you mentioned the strength work being increasing that ceiling, and the fact that too much of the stuff is done in the middle, and this middle is where rugby is played, which is why we want that exposure to to challenge us and getting that toughness within that area. But that should be saved for that middle stuff. I think you're not getting tougher by pushing your one rep max, for or doing like a Widowmaker, for example, that 20 rep squat stuff. Like that doesn't make you mentally tougher, just makes you hurt. But the other thing that I think is crucial that people want to hear, you increase that ceiling, with, I also like to include speed work and some sort of energy system, ATP, PC system development at the top. So they can really push those high highs when they're needed to. But that's, just to help you develop for rugby. The other thing I never shut the fuck up about this because it's so, so important. People don't think about it, is that is developing also your floor. So, get real deep with your aerobic system, because then that allows you much more room in this middle, right? But that's where you don't train in the middle because it's kind of gross. It's like, it's really tough, but you don't develop yourself enough to recover, or you don't develop yourself enough to get a good benefit. But it's just tough, too much. Like it's much tougher than aerobic work. So it does that and basic bodybuilding work. So it fatigues you quite significantly, which for your detriment for the rest of the week. And therefore, you shouldn't target that to develop your fitness, but that's where you play the game. So do your rugby training there, like, so you don't have to do more stuff. But I think people look at rugby, or they look at any sport really, a lot of field sports have played the same. They're in this middle area and they think, well, I need to do that to match that. But that doesn't develop you long term. And I think people are missing that sort of, I don't know, wider vision of how both to develop fitness and to develop, like, being a better player.
Oh, absolutely. The best example as well is not best, but a good one is if you want to get faster, you have to run at 90% or more of your max velocity. Like
Mhm,
that's the typical Charlie Francis model, right? Like, and anything between 75% and 90% is junk
mhm,
for speed development.
mhm,
Yes, it will enhance, your anaerobic capacity, but it is highly fatiguing. It's tough to recover from, and you're not getting faster because you're not running at a speed that's going to provide that sense of overload. And
mhm.
so it's that place where, it fits for speed. It's like everything that you talked about. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Metcons always fall in that middle. A lot of rugby players love to do Metcons, because I had a guy message me before, a while back on Instagram, when I posted about how I really don't like him, and he really was he understood, but he was upset because he's like, "Look, I know you hate them, but I still like doing them because, they feel tough, and I feel like I've pushed myself through." And I was like, "Yeah, but you are you doing that? Are you doing a Metcon for your mental benefit? In which case, like, isn't that why you're playing rugby? Why don't you just save it for the rugby? Why don't you just be better at, develop your aerobic system, or develop whatever it is you physically want to develop, and not wreck yourself doing Metcons?" And there's no real physical answer for it, except people enjoy them.
No, exactly. Metcons are so interesting. I had my cousin once talk to me about it. He said, "Imagine how much power is developed when you're in 135 cleans at 135 pounds for reps." I was like, "I don't know. How much did you develop in that one rep?" Like that's, what power isn't some game. It's an
Yeah.
instant measurement. And so there's so much that, the Metcons are, if CrossFit's your sport, the Metcons are one.
It's the same thing, right? You don't play rugby to be a better CrossFit athlete. It's the exact same thing. But then again, we're talking about this middle area that is your measuring stick, but it's not what you do to develop.
Yep. And you can do a Metcon, like, literally, it's just metabolic conditioning. And so why does it have to be a bar, right? It's
Mhm,
why can't you actually put in a wrestling component and then mimic the game? You hit the ruck, you've got to wrestle into the ruck. You make the tackle, the ruck has to happen, and then now you got to jog to get into or run to get into position, and then you got to do something similar there. Like mimic the game, like the fitness components of the game by having multiple small sided games that people have to run into. That's metabolic conditioning. You're just not moving a weight, you're playing the game.
100%. Yeah, I think that's where Alex Viada had a big influence on me because he even programs from Complete Humans Performance. He even programs for CrossFit athletes that do regionals and are very successful, and they barely do any metcons because that's how they develop. And I was like, oh shit, like if even the best CrossFitters aren't doing that, like what are people doing? Doesn't make sense.
I mean, look at Rich Froning. That's not how he trained. They
No.
train multiple times a day, the different qualities that are necessary. They might have strength work in the morning and then aerobic work at night. And then it's, in that world, it turns into, the Metcon is your practice. You're
Mhm.
not doing the Metcon for fitness. You're doing the Metcon to practice your tech, how you work in that kind of scenario.
Mhm.
Can you transition well? What is your technique looking like when you get fatigued? But practice is different than physical preparation. And I think people get lost in that piece. Whereas if you need to practice, practice. If you
Mhm.
need to physically condition, condition. Don't try to like bring everything into one.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's funny, and I keep saying this because like you know what I run here is rugby muscle. It's all about it, and I still, we separate these things massively because it's just how you become better. I'd probably sell a lot more programs and do a lot more business if I did some funky exercises, and I'd definitely get a lot more traction on like reels and stuff on Instagram because they'd look cooler. But I'm not doing it because it's not what develops you as a player. It doesn't make you. It doesn't actually help. But it looks cool.
So
I want to sort of actually, before I switch gears, the other thing that you mentioned was about the mental toughness side of things is switching music off. I've done that with endurance work a lot. Like I'll say, you go out and you don't listen to music, but you've got, a 30, 40 minute, like low and slow. So it's nothing there's no reason physically that they should ever even really rely on music. Again, this is from Alex Viado. It's just a way you to then not just focus on focus on different parts of your performance. So as opposed to just focus on the pain of your legs or whatever, or being bored and letting your brain just go wild, you focus on just your form and the set, making sure that you're running right. Or if you're on the elliptical, we're focused on other things. Or even we've done it before where we've actually completely zoned out and we've actually used it to try and concentrate and read a book because that actually makes for a different stimulus. It's like trying to really distract the brain away while still performing. Is there anything to be said for where this crosses the line, I guess, is from being sort of mental toughness to actual just sort of mental training, compartmentalizing? I know you've worked with quite a few endurance athletes, and this is something I believe they do better than others. Is this something that we as rugby athletes can learn from them?
I think it can be. I think the biggest point that you mentioned is that, it's when you're out there running or doing any sort of like just traditional like aerobic type work,
Mhm.
what is the purpose to just go out and do it? Or is the purpose to get better at that specific skill? Because multiple people, everybody has a different objective when it comes to running. Some people might just go out because they just need to get away from the world and in silence, and it's not necessarily a mental skills piece. Some people it might be like, this is the only time that I get to listen to my own music.
Mhm.
Like when I drive the kids to school, where I'm playing the Sing soundtrack, which it's good music, but it's not exactly my cup of tea. And
Mhm.
so if I go out and do a run, well then right, or just anything, right?
That's
And so I think it's, it can be, but the biggest part is can you still train well with appropriate intensity without the music?
Mhm.
And if you can, use it as needed. But if you need the music to be able to go out and do what you need to do, you really need to step back and think about how you're approaching things because it's not the music's not there when you compete.
Mhm.
It's you if you really hate it that much, like, there's something to be said about embracing the suck. You know, if you hate going out for a run, but it makes sense for your sport, you gotta do it. You don't have to like it, but you gotta pick yourself up and get out there and take care of that responsibility that you have. I mean, it's no different. Like some people might not like going to sleep early or going to sleep, at a reasonable time or waking up early. But if that's a necessity, you have to do it. I used to do when I was a weight room supervisor, we would play only 70s disco because it's upbeat enough. Nobody can argue about it, and it's just background noise. And
Mhm.
what I did is that's what we always had, but I kept in my back pocket, and this is when I was working with volleyball. There was one day I was like, "All right, guess what? Y'all get to choose the music today." Because I saw that they came in and they were just done. It was it made sense for the time of year. They just needed a pick me up to come in and just have a good session, but also just from that mental like relief standpoint. And I remember this girl's face. She said, "Anything?" I was like, "Yep." Beyonce? Yep. No way. Absolutely. I flipped on Beyonce and it was a beautiful session. And so again, that is something that can be used strategically for yourself. Like I have a playlist that I play during peak week because it just hits different. And if it's not peak week, I change it up because I want to have that same stimulus because you do want to train hard. Don't get me wrong, but you also want to like have that. You don't want to become desensitized to it. Kind of like coffee, right? You keep drinking coffee, eventually you need 6 cups a day just to get the stimulus. Whereas it's probably a good idea to pull off and go down to 1 or so and then bring it back up.
100%. I think I stole this from James Hoffman, who said periodize everything because it makes so much sense. And this actually goes perfectly into what I wanted to talk into next. But I think using that sort of stuff is exactly what it's there for, right? It allows you then, to use that music when you do need that intensity, or use whatever mental cues, or yeah, pre-workout's a massive one as well, right? Use it when you need to, but if it becomes a crutch, then it's absolutely a problem. And really, like, because you can, it's either a problem, for yourself mentally, or actually it's a problem with your training, right? Because if you need that much of a juice to get going, like, are you actually overly fatigued? Like, or if you can't meet your running or whatever it is, especially if you're just doing lists, right? Like low intensity work, like there shouldn't be a need for music to get you through that, or your general weight room work outside of peak week. Like, there shouldn't be a need to really need outside stimulus to get you going. You should be able to you should have done everything in the previous week to get you going. 100%. I also think there's something to be said about the mental benefit of pushing through that when it's tough. You're not necessarily pushing through like real physical barriers. It's just a mental barrier that exists for some reason, even though physically you can do it. I think that's even like I feel that every time I do like a weekly long run at the minute. It's not that hard, I finish and I can still hold a conversation the entire time. But every Sunday morning or whichever morning I go, I faff around for an hour. It takes me like an hour to make a coffee, and then I'm just mincing about because I know I don't want to go out and run and not have my phone on me, but my brain is just doing anything to avoid it. But afterwards, I always feel better. Going to bed earlier as well, the same thing, right? Your brain just doesn't want to go to bed that early because there's so much Netflix to watch or whatever it is. But afterwards, when you wake up in the morning, you feel so much better. You got through it. You did what you were supposed to do, and now you reap the reward. And I think there's something to be said for whether that develops mental toughness or just mental discipline, maybe. Because all it is it's not necessarily doing something overly difficult. It's just doing what you are supposed to do.
I think it's dead on, honestly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, it's not, and then even then, you don't see it as discipline. It's just, you said you were gonna do it, you did it, great. Like, you don't think it's tough or difficult. Like, no one thinks they're tough for brushing their teeth twice a day, but hopefully everyone does it.
Right.
Unless you plan on periodizing your teeth brushing, let it develop for one time. For some weeks you do it just once a day, and then by the end, before you go to the dentist, you the 2 weeks before you brush them 5 times. Please don't do that.
but
But you should periodize everything else. You've been on a recent trend of just chasing hypertrophy gains. What caused this sort of venture down? You stepping on? I don't think you have any ambitions of stepping on stage, or am I wrong? Oh,
yeah, no, I want to. It's
nice.
interesting.
I never saw
So
that coming.
yeah, I didn't either. What ended up happening was it was so oldest kid is almost 5, and then he was born in 2017. From the time that he was born to the time till fall of 2020, like, I honestly got into a funk with training, specifically with resistance training, something that I've historically loved, and I barely did, maybe once a week. There might have been 6-week stints that I didn't do anything at all, and then and during that time, I ran 2 50Ks. I ran my first marathon that I ever ran was just fully self-supported by myself running on back roads. I ran a marathon in the snow. So I did some really cool stuff that's fun to
Nice.
say. But for all of that, it was like the first 50K, it was July 10th of 2018. I was in San Francisco for a wedding. My wife, her sister, and her brother all went out and did this beautiful marathon and 30K in the parks around San Francisco, around Golden Gate. And I was their driver, and I drove there, and I just sat there for 7 hours. So this is not I wanna be out there, and at
Hmm.
that time, I really hadn't done anything, and so on July 10th, I said, "Okay, I'm gonna do a 50K in October." And so I trained for a 50K, and I did it. It was the worst pain I've ever felt finishing that thing, but I finished it. And but that was a 3-month stint. The next 50K I did was similar. It was like a 3-month stint. And then in fall of 2020, I started to actually train, like legitimately train again. And I got the passion back, the drive, and I started lifting weights. I said, everything that I've ever done has been at most about 2 years that I've committed to anything. And otherwise, it's just been a lot of dabbling, which has given me a
Hmm.
really broad approach to things, but it's from a very short time frame. I wanted the long term. Like, can I commit to something for 6 years and realize the gains and make the parts of myself better that I knew I needed to make better? So I was 34 at the time, and I said, I want to do a bodybuilding show when I'm 40. And so I'm a year in now, and I've learned so much about myself and everything, and it's been a life-changing experience, actually.
Hmm. Interesting. In what ways?
So it all started so it was February 1st-ish, 2021 that I started it, and I started with a cut because I wanted to get as lean as I could, and I got lean, but then I had the desires and then to just spend money randomly, which isn't normal for me, or historically wasn't. I was procrastinating sleep during this cut. So I'd like lay down to bed and then I'd be on the phone, right? And then you procrastinate when you intentionally try to go to sleep. And so I incorporated some changes. So I said, okay, I will do meditation before bed. I will start to maybe incorporate, sugar-free substitutes to see if that helps. Well, that didn't help at all. The meditation worked a little bit, but wasn't something that was sustainable. So I made it through the cut, did a reverse diet, got into my mass, and the mass went pretty well. But then I would have these periods where the impulsivity just went boom, just hammered me.
Mhm.
And I would just go excessive with eating, and it wasn't eating disordered behavior, I later found out. It was something else. And then it came into the fall of last year where I actually had a relatively easy semester. I had no new course preparations. I had a higher load, a client load than I normally take, but nothing crazy. And I was struggling even being able to work and just to function, and it was permeating everything that I was doing, and this was in a mass phase, like, it wasn't like I was in a caloric deficit at all, and what I ended up doing was TikTok of all things. I saw some ADHD TikTok pop up, And I said that they had some, real, I could relate to a lot of what was being said from both psychiatrists and, people doing skits that have ADHD. And so I scheduled a appointment to get myself checked out. And I should also preface it by back in May, I started an anti-anxiety medication. So it was just overwhelming me. And it kind of worked. It didn't work once the fall hit. It prompted that, "Let's go get checked for ADHD," because as a friend of mine would say, "Name it to tame it." If I have ADHD, great. If I don't, awesome, then that's not it. I can move on to the next thing, which is kind of how I approached this entire year. Well, it turns out that I do have ADHD, and I've had it for my entire life. It's just that it didn't be I was able to mask it well. It's not extreme, but I was able to mask it well, and it never had a significant and consistently negative impact on my life
Hmm.
until last year when I actively tried to address these things like my impulsivity, which is an ADHD trait. The inability to really focus in and listen to people like my wife. She could be talking to me. I could be looking at her. All of the other background noise just jumbles me. Having the need to have high anxiety arousal to be able to get things done. So like procrastination. Like I finished my dissertation in a month when I did it. I had data collection at the end of April, and this was in 2014, but data collection at the end of April, I defended in June of that year. And so it was everything kind of clicked. And even, in college, I tried Adderall once just because I needed to study and a friend of mine had it. They're like, "Here, try it out." And it was mind blowing to me. And as I was talking to my counselor and like medical professionals, they had said, they're like, it's if it works, there's obviously something there. And so
Hmm.
I started taking Adderall in December, and it's been life changing, actually. And so that's kind of the most fun thing about this process was that I ran some statistics last week, or yet not last week. It was like Saturday, and I saw that about 70% of my phases I was, consistent with last year. So like if I was in a mass phase, 70% of those weeks I was in a positive body weight change
Hmm.
percentage wise. If I was in a cut, I was in a negative, body weight change percentage wise. So 70% of the weeks of last year, I was doing what I needed to do. And that was through all of the struggle. So now it's like I have this objective of like, all right, now I'm going for more than 70. I'm going to try for 80, 85% or even more. So that way I gain more muscle. I have, all of the positives that are coming with sleep, with family life, with work. Everything is kind of it's been a year to kind of
Hmm.
address things that I know, like this is my realm. I know exactly what to do. Couldn't do it.
No, hundred
And it
percent.
took a lot of steps to get there, but it's now it's gonna be a real interesting 5 years because I enjoy lifting again. I can get it done in the amount of time that I have available, 45 minutes to an hour, 4 days a week, and it's fun, and obviously, there's all the quality of life stuff as well.
Yeah, and that's going to be a real interesting goal as far as like you've got a lot of time between now and then to get, for lack of a better term, to get distracted as far as other goals. Oh, yeah, I've still got 5 years. Could I see? Let's see if I can do a powerlifting meet in the meantime, or whatever it is. Because I think when you said, you sort of dabble in lots of different areas. That's how I've approached a lot of my, particularly my weight room stuff. As far as I've wanted to see the weight room through a lot of different lenses, and I don't know if, yeah, actually, one of my goals for this year is to sort of outsource all of my training and just not think about it. And maybe here and there I'll say, oh, can we sort of tweak this and do this? But other than that, I'm just going to try and just train as an athlete because I know myself, I'll constantly sort of change the goal and to my own detriment, but also to my own mental somewhat benefit because I always like to keep changing and pursuing other things. But I know long term that doesn't really help. And that's why we need to plan these things.
And I have a coach as well. Like, I'm fully capable of doing it, and I actually work with, my coach is Steve at Revive Stronger.
All right.
Uh Yeah, and it
Mhm.
was, he's their training philosophy and ideologies are real similar to what I'm used to and what RP is, and is kind of nice to get a slightly different but similar perspective that I can trust. And it's been amazing. Like even today, I had, it's snow and ice here. Like I'm home, which is not normal with the 3 kids. And I had a funeral yesterday. So I'm 2 days into this week. My
Mhm.
training week is kind of screwed. And this is the first time it's happened since I started, over a year. And I just said, like, look, I'm just going to do a deload and keep it at 90%,
Mhm.
50% of the volume. I have to train at home because I have kids that are trying to, pop in to things right now. But it was good to just shoot him that email, say, "This is what I'm thinking. This is where, this is a scenario. We're gonna get back to normal." Okay, we'll go fix it. That's Thomas.
There you go. He approves of your deload.
Buddy, go play. Thank you. But it's been nice because I could throw that idea out there. I can get back to normal training next week. I'm in a cut right now, and I hit the cut too hard to start with. And I know that now because I was coming fresh off the mass and that was my fault. And so it kind of worked. And I'll still get a good intensity out of it, but just the volume will drop just because my availability is changed this week.
But what's the real big benefit of that, both the long-term sort of mindset, but also that having a coach as well, is that you're able to do things like take that work week off, and it sort of, excuse me, sort of brings us full circle in that you a lot of people will think, "Oh, I've got to be tough. This is going to be a real difficult week. I'm going to push through and I'm going to be better for it." But like, if you're stressed out, you fucking nut. Like, doing more stuff on top of that is not going to help, particularly if it is those sorts of stressful training intensities that really induce fatigue and like just run you into the ground. And I think this is a mistake. And you said right at the top that, these people live real lives. We might have a very small handful of professionals listening to this or semi-professionals listening to this. Otherwise, you're working and even then, you've still got lots of other stress on your day-to-day life. Like, this isn't everything. And to have the freedom to step back and realize that in the long term, you're gonna be okay, not feel that guilt for skipping stuff and not feel like that feeling that you've let yourself down, that you need to be tougher. Like, it's massive.
Mhm. It is. And it helps having the long-term perspective, like knowing that, okay, it's 6 years. I'm looking at trying to put on, 2 to 3 pounds a year, being realistic. And what's going to allow me to do that is setting myself up for consistency. I
Yeah.
have students that ask this, I have clients. It's like, what's the most important thing? What can you do to put yourself in a situation to be consistent?
Mhm.
Because if you can't be consistent, like 80, 90% consistent, 70% even over the course of the entire phase, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You have to, that means understanding where the difficulties lie and then adjusting to it.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna have you go to a wedding on a weekend. That's cool. Enjoy it. We can make some plans around it, but you get done with the wedding the next day, guess what? You're just back to your normal routine, right? Like, yeah, you'll be delayed by probably a week in your progress, but it's all good. Like,
Mhm.
there's no problem. You enjoyed life. Like, if you're a professional, it's a different story, right? Like, you have to factor in that piece. If you legitimately have a or are a professional or you could actually make it to that point. But professionals are what, 1% of the population? You know,
Yeah, if that.
throwing a number
Uh-huh.
out there, it's not many
No.
in any sport. And so let's be honest with ourselves about enjoying life and still achieving our goals at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where a lot of those types of workouts come from, the you gotta be tougher and all of that, is trying to flog unfit people because they weren't prepared, because they weren't consistent in the first place, and now we're scared and we gotta make up for lost time. Like, it's almost like a complete, whereas what you're on now is like a feedback cycle that, like, is reinforces itself, allows you to stay stress-free, allows you to keep progressing, and, it feeds back into itself. A lot of people get stuck on that other never-ending loop of not staying consistent. They're pushing themselves too hard because they're making up for lost time, which they can't stay consistent with, and leads to even more problems. So yeah.
That I see that a lot with NCAA. Like, you look at a fall sport NCAA athlete in the United States, they get done somewhere around in December. Then there's no contact period with any coaches at all for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And actually mid-December is pretty late. You could be talking, 8 weeks even of no contact. Well, there's an expectation that athletes are gonna train, but they don't. And the reason they don't is because they know as soon as they step foot on that campus in January, they're gonna get destroyed
Mhm.
because that's the typical, like, "You were gone, we got a lot of work to do, blah, 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 blah," right? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why not instead have them trust you, get 8 really solid weeks of training out of them on their own that's just simple, it's something. They come back knowing that they're not gonna get annihilated, that they can actually work into the fitness that they need, and that it's better for everybody. And now you gained 8 weeks of actual training and if you're looking at NCAA athletes, you might be looking at 20, 24 weeks of actual training a year. Maybe,
Mhm.
maybe. And that's dispersed into usually 6 to 8 week segments. And I think a lot of people in that world anyway, or at least that want to get into it, kind of forget that that's the case, that you don't have time. And so really be mindful of how you're using it. Is this to the best of what you have and the goals that you want to achieve?
For sure. Awesome. Dr. Jake, it was really good having you back on. As I've said about your new hypertrophy and now confirmed bodybuilding journey, you seem to share some really cool insights on your Instagram. So do you want to plug that real quick so that people can follow along?
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing that at the beginning, I think probably in March or so last
Hmm.
year.
Yeah.
I really stopped doing anything because I liked chronicling the journey. And it was at about that point that I realized that it takes a really long time to do that well. And it wasn't time that I had.
Yeah.
And
100%.
so I will be posting on Instagram periodic updates about the process and
Hmm.
describing this kind of stuff because I think, the mental health component is important. Demonstrating that it took me a year to actually get to that point is huge. And I have a year's worth of data from I wear an Aura ring and a Whoop band because athlete monitoring is my thing. And it's fun. And I have all my sleep, all my HRV, all my resting heart rate, the meaningful stuff tracked over the course of a year, and it's fascinating to see. It's just hard to capture it in such a limited format, especially when I can ramble forever.
Okay. So then
So,
when
yeah.
you get your blog started, we'll plug that as well then.
Say again?
I said when
My
you get
blog?
yeah, there you go. That would be a nice place. Or just your own podcast.
Own podcast, own YouTube series.
There you go.
Thought about the YouTube piece, but yeah, it's RP Dr. Reed is
Cool.
my Insta.
Awesome. Well, yeah. If you get a few new followers, then that's pressure on you to at least do something this month or something. Yeah. There you go.
For sure.
All right. Well, it's been great having you on. I enjoyed chatting.
Absolutely, as did I. Thank you as always.
All right. Hey there, it's TJ once again. Thank you for listening to that episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm just here one more time. I know you thought you were rid of me, but I got something pretty cool that I want to send your way. I've tried to condense all the most important things that you need to make progress: the training, the mindset, the nutrition, everything you hear in these podcasts and more, presented in a free 2-week program called Rugby Muscle Kickoff. Through Kickoff, you'll have access to 2 weeks of emails delivered directly to your inbox, 2 weeks of videos, education, and interaction, and access to tools, strategies, tactics previously reserved only for paying clients. To join, simply click the link in the description of this podcast, the one that says Kickoff. Or if you want to go old school and type it out, then crack on. Access it at rugby-muscle.com/kickoff, all one word. Cheers for listening to the podcast. See you guys next time.